In the small town of Outwit, Poland, 7-year-old Irena Kryzhanowska watched her father prepare for another house call. Dr. Stanisław Kryzhanowski was no ordinary physician. While other doctors in 1917 Poland often refused to treat Jewish patients, Stanisław opened his doors to everyone, regardless of their faith or ability to pay. "Papa, why do the other children at school say you shouldn't help Jewish people?" young Irena asked one evening. Stanisław knelt down to meet his daughter's curious eyes. "Irena, people are people. When someone is sick, they need help. It doesn't matter if they pray in a church or a synagogue. What matters is that they are human beings who deserve compassion." These words would echo in Irena's heart for the rest of her life. Her father's medical practice often meant treating patients who couldn't afford to pay, particularly in the Jewish quarter of Outwit. The Kryzhanowski family lived modestly as a result, but Irena learned early that some things were more valuable than money. The lesson became tragically personal when Stanisław contracted typhus from his patients in 1917. As he lay dying, representatives from the Jewish community came to their home with an extraordinary offer. They had pooled their resources to ensure that 7-year-old Irena could continue her education, honoring the memory of the doctor who had treated them with dignity when others would not. "Your father saved our children," one elderly man told young Irena. "Now we will help save yours." Irena's mother, Janina, struggled to support her daughter alone, but the community's generosity made it possible for Irena to attend school. She excelled in her studies, driven by her father's example and the kindness of those who had invested in her future. As she grew older, Irena often visited the Jewish families who had helped fund her education. She learned Yiddish phrases, celebrated holidays with Jewish neighbors, and formed friendships that transcended religious boundaries. Her childhood was shaped not by prejudice, but by the understanding that humanity knows no religious limits. The values instilled during these formative years: compassion without condition, courage in the face of injustice, and an unwavering belief in human dignity, would later drive Irena to risk everything for strangers. In the modest home in Otok, surrounded by the gratitude of a community her father had served, the foundation was laid for one of history's most extraordinary acts of heroism. By 1928, 18-year-old Irena had blossomed into a determined young woman with an unwavering sense of justice. Her acceptance to Warsaw University to study Polish literature represented the culmination of years of hard work and the investment of those who had believed in her potential since childhood. Warsaw, in the late 1920s, buzzed with intellectual energy, but also simmered with growing anti-Semitic tensions. At the university, Irena witnessed firsthand the discrimination that her Jewish classmates faced. She watched as ghetto benches were introduced, segregating Jewish students to specific areas of lecture halls. "If my Jewish colleagues must sit apart, then I will stand with them," she declared during a literature lecture, rising from her seat and moving to the designated Jewish section. Her act of solidarity drew both admiration and scorn, but Irena remained unmoved by criticism. Professor Ludwik Szewicki noticed the young woman's principled stance. After class one day, he approached her. "Miss Kryzhanowska, your moral courage reminds me of your father's reputation. Have you considered social work as a profession?" The suggestion resonated deeply. Social work would allow Irena to follow her father's example of helping society's most vulnerable members. She began volunteering at soup kitchens and orphanages around Warsaw, drawn particularly to work with impoverished children and families. During her university years, Irena met Irena Sendler, a fellow student studying history. Mieczysław shared her progressive values and supported her advocacy for social justice. Their courtship blossomed amid shared ideals and a mutual commitment to making the world more equitable. After graduating in 1932, Irena married Mieczysław and began working for Warsaw's social welfare department, focusing on aid programs for the city's poorest residents. Many of her clients were Jewish families struggling in an increasingly hostile environment. As the 1,930 seconds progressed, Irena watched with growing alarm as anti-Semitic policies spread throughout Poland. Jewish professionals were barred from certain occupations, Jewish businesses faced boycotts, and violence against Jewish communities increased. Mrs. Sendler, one elderly Jewish woman, confided during a welfare visit, "We feel like strangers in our own country. What will become of us?" Irena had no answer then, but she made a silent promise to herself. If the situation worsened, she would not stand by passively. The values her father had instilled demanded action. By 1939, 29-year-old Irena Sendler had established herself as a dedicated social worker, with networks of trust throughout Warsaw. She could not have known that these relationships would soon become the foundation for a rescue network that would save thousands of lives. The 1st of September 1939 shattered the morning calm in Warsaw as German bombers screamed overhead. Irena Sendler stood at her apartment window, watching smoke rise from the first air raids on her beloved city. Within hours, Nazi Germany's invasion of Poland had begun, and the world she knew would be transformed beyond recognition. The German occupation brought immediate persecution of Poland's Jewish population. Streets that had once bustled with diverse communities now echoed with jackboots and harsh German commands. Anti-Jewish decrees followed rapidly. Jews were banned from parks, theaters, and schools. They were forced to wear identifying armbands and faced severe restrictions on movement and livelihood. For Irena, working in Warsaw's social welfare department, the human cost became immediately apparent. Jewish families who had once been self-sufficient suddenly appeared at her office, desperate for food and assistance. Children who should have been in school wandered the streets. The fear in people's eyes was palpable. The most devastating blow came in October 1940 with the establishment of the Warsaw Ghetto. Nazi authorities cordoned off a small section of the city with walls and barbed wire, forcing over 400,000 Jewish residents into an area designed to hold perhaps 80,000. Families were given hours to pack their belongings and abandon homes they had lived in for generations. As a social worker, Irena had legitimate reasons to enter the ghetto. Her department coordinated relief efforts and monitored public health conditions. She obtained the necessary permits and epidemic control passes that allowed her access through the guarded gates. Her first entry into the ghetto left her speechless. The overcrowding was unimaginable. Entire families crammed into single rooms, multiple families sharing apartments designed for one. The stench of sewage and unwashed bodies filled the air. Children begged in the streets while their parents searched desperately for work or food. "This isn't sustainable," Irena confided to her husband that evening. "They're creating conditions that will kill people through disease and starvation, even if they never fire a shot." What disturbed her most were the children. She saw toddlers with hollow eyes and distended bellies, signs of severe malnutrition. School-aged children had become small adults overnight, caring for younger siblings or trying to earn money to help their families survive. Rabbi David Shapira pulled her aside during one visit. "Mrs. Sendler, the situation grows worse each day. We hear rumors of what's happening to Jewish communities in other cities. If you can help us, especially our children, please do what you can." That conversation marked a turning point. Irena realized that small acts of charity were insufficient for the catastrophe unfolding. The Nazi plan was systematic destruction, and she would find a way to save lives, starting with the most vulnerable, the children. Winter 1941 brought unprecedented suffering to the Warsaw Ghetto. With each visit, Irena witnessed the systematic dehumanization of an entire population. The narrow streets teemed with skeletal figures, their clothes hanging like rags on emaciated frames. Children no longer played. They scavenged, begged, or lay motionless in doorways, too weak from hunger to move. The official food ration provided fewer than 200 calories per day, a starvation diet that condemned people to slow death. Irena watched mothers give their meager portions to their children, sacrificing themselves in desperate attempts to keep their young ones alive. The sight of a woman feeding bread to her toddler, while she herself appeared near death, haunted Irena's dreams. Disease spread rapidly through the overcrowded quarters. Typhus, dysentery, and tuberculosis claimed lives daily. Bodies wrapped in paper appeared on street corners each morning, families too weak to properly bury their dead. The smell of death mixed with human waste and unwashed bodies, creating an atmosphere that seemed to seep into one's soul. A gaunt man named Samuel approached her. "My daughter is 8 years old. She hasn't eaten in 3 days. Can you help?" The child he indicated barely looked 5, her growth stunted by malnutrition, her eyes vacant with hunger. These encounters multiplied daily. Irena's official reports documented the crisis in clinical terms, but her private journal revealed the emotional toll. How can human beings treat others this way? These are families, professionals, children who weeks ago lived normal lives. Dr. Janusz Korczak, the renowned educator caring for 200 orphans in impossible conditions, became one of Irena's key contacts. "The children still laugh sometimes," he told her during one visit. "They find joy in small things, a piece of candy, a story, a song. This gives me hope that their spirits might survive this nightmare." But even Korczak's optimism couldn't mask reality. Children were dying at alarming rates. Irena saw infants who never cried because they lacked strength. She encountered children who had become mute from trauma and starvation. Most heartbreaking were children who had become family breadwinners, smuggling food through holes in the wall. Mrs. Roja Goldstein, a teacher, shared her fears. "They're not just trying to contain us, Mrs. Sendler. They mean to eliminate us entirely. The children sense it too. They ask me why the soldiers look at them with such hatred." These conversations crystallized Irena's understanding that traditional social work was inadequate. The Nazi plan was genocide, systematic and deliberate. Relief work might ease suffering temporarily, but only rescue could save lives. Looking at children's faces, seeing them as lifelines to hope, Irena felt the weight of moral responsibility. These children had no voice, no power, no means of escape. They depended entirely on adults who still had freedom to act. Standing surrounded by unimaginable suffering, Irena Sendler transformed from social worker to resistance fighter. The time for documentation had passed. Now was the time for action. By early 1942, Irena had connected with other Poles who shared her determination to resist Nazi genocide. Through whispered conversations and coded messages, she discovered a network of individuals who refused to remain passive witnesses to the systematic murder of their Jewish neighbors. Her first formal contact with organized resistance came through Żegota, the Polish Council to Aid Jews, established in December 1942. This underground organization provided the structure and resources Irena needed to expand her efforts beyond individual acts of mercy. Julian Grobelny, Żegota's chairman, outlined the organization's mission during their first clandestine meeting. "We cannot save everyone, but we can save some. Every life preserved is a victory against evil." Irena immediately volunteered to focus on children, knowing they were most vulnerable and had the least chance of survival without intervention. Her position with the Social Welfare Department provided perfect cover, while her established ghetto relationships gave her access that other rescuers lacked. Building her rescue network required identifying trustworthy individuals who would risk their lives for strangers. Irena carefully recruited colleagues, evaluating not just their willingness to help, but their ability to maintain secrecy under pressure. Irena Schultz, a fellow social worker and longtime friend, became one of her first recruits. "Are you asking me to commit treason against the German Reich?" Schultz asked. Because if you are, my answer is yes. This isn't treason, it's humanity. Jadwiga Piotrowska, a city administrator with access to blank identity documents, joined despite having young children. I look at my own children sleeping safely, she told Irena, and I know I cannot rest while other children are dying simply because they were born Jewish. The network expanded to include Stanisława Busold, who could process false papers, Władysława Marinowska, who had connections with Catholic institutions, and others who provided safe houses throughout Warsaw. Each member understood that capture meant torture and death, yet these women chose courage over safety. We're not heroes, Irena insisted during planning meetings. We're just doing what any decent person should do. The real heroes are the parents who trust us with their children, knowing they may never see them again. Establishing procedures required careful planning. They developed coded language, created multiple safe houses, and established protocols for obtaining false documents. Every detail accounted for the possibility that network members might be captured and interrogated. Father Marceli Godlewski and other clergy became crucial allies, providing hiding places and arranging false baptismal certificates. Mother Superior Matilda Getter agreed to hide Jewish children, despite knowing discovery would mean death for the entire sisterhood. By spring 1942, Irena's network was operational and ready. They had safe houses, recruited families, created document systems, and developed smuggling methods. Looking at her assembled team, Irena felt both pride and trepidation. They were about to embark on a mission that would test every limit of human courage and ingenuity. The first rescue operation took place on a cold March morning in 1942. Irena approached the ghetto gates with her heart pounding, carrying official papers and medical supplies. Hidden beneath was a small compartment that would carry a 6-month-old baby to safety. Mrs. Adela Carmiol had made the agonizing decision to give up her infant daughter. "She will die here with us," the young mother whispered through tears. "At least this way, she has a chance to live." The baby, given a mild sedative to prevent crying, fit into the specially designed compartment. As Irena walked through the gates, she forced herself to maintain professional composure while her heart raced. The German guards barely glanced at her papers. She had become a familiar figure. Once outside, Irena rushed to a safe house where Maria Kukulska waited with formula and clean clothes. The infant would be given a Polish identity and placed with a Catholic family. The first life had been saved. Success encouraged expansion of their methods. The network developed increasingly creative smuggling techniques. Older children could walk out through sewer systems, guided by network members who knew the underground routes. This required children brave enough to crawl through dark, dangerous passages. The ambulance method proved effective for rescuing sick children. Irena would enter with medical personnel, document a child as critically ill, and transport them to hospitals outside the walls. Once there, the child would die on paper, while actually being transferred to safety. For babies, the coffin method saved numerous lives. Small children were placed in coffins with air holes, carried out as supposed typhus victims. At predetermined locations, the coffins were opened and children taken to safety. The most dangerous method involved smuggling through the old courthouse that bordered the ghetto. Network member Jadwiga Piotrowska discovered passages connecting the building's basement to the ghetto. Children could be moved through these spaces during guard shift changes. Each rescue required precise timing and nerves of steel. 10-year-old Regina Safirstein was smuggled in a garbage truck, hidden beneath refuse. "I counted to 1,000 over and over," Regina later recalled, believing that if I reached 1,000 one more time, I would be safe. Psychological preparation proved as challenging as physical logistics. Children had to forget their real names, families, and Jewish identity to survive. "You are going on an adventure," Irena would tell frightened children. "You will have a new name and family. But you must never tell anyone your old name. This is a secret game. and your life depends on playing it perfectly. The most heartbreaking aspect was witnessing parents' agony as they made impossible decisions. Promise me you will tell her about us, one father pleaded as his daughter was prepared for smuggling. Irena made that promise again and again, knowing each commitment added weight to her mission. By summer 1942, dozens of children had been successfully smuggled to safety. Creating new identities for rescued Jewish children required a complex underground operation, touching every aspect of Polish bureaucracy. Irena's network had to transform traumatized, often malnourished children into convincing Polish Catholics with documented histories, family connections, and believable backgrounds. The process began with obtaining blank birth certificates and identity documents. Jadwiga Piotrowska used her city administration position to access blank forms, while others cultivated relationships with sympathetic clerks. Each document required official stamps, signatures, and registration numbers that would withstand scrutiny. Father Marceli Godlewski and other clergy provided crucial assistance by backdating baptismal records and creating church documentation. In God's eyes, Father Godlewski told Irena, "We are not creating lies, but preserving truth, the truth that every child deserves life and love." The most challenging aspect was coaching children to embrace their new identities completely. 7-year-old David Goldstein became Stanisław Kowalski, but he had to forget not just his name but his entire history. He could no longer speak Yiddish, remember Hebrew prayers, or mention his parents' occupations. "You must become Polish in your heart," Irena explained. "When someone asks your name, you don't think, you immediately say Stanisław. When they ask about your parents, you remember only your new story. Your old life is a secret you must keep even from yourself." Many children struggled with the psychological transformation. 8-year-old Sarah Goldberg, now Maria Nowak, would wake crying for her mama and papa. Network member Maria Kukulska spent hours reinforcing the new identity while providing emotional comfort without referencing the child's true past. The placement process required careful matching with Polish families willing to hide them. Irena personally interviewed potential families, evaluating their commitment and ability to maintain the dangerous deception. The Selejek family agreed to take 3 siblings, treating them as their own children. Catholic orphanages and convents provided hiding places for dozens of children. Mother Superior Matilda Getter sheltered over 30 Jewish children, ensuring they learned Catholic prayers while secretly preserving knowledge of their true identities. Some placements worked beautifully. Young Elżbieta Fikowska was raised by the Kostrzewa family as their own daughter, attending Catholic school and appearing as a typical Polish child to outside observers. The network maintained detailed records of each placement, creating a secret database too dangerous to keep in any single location. Irena developed a system of coded lists distributed among trusted members. Financial support came from multiple sources. Żegota provided funding, network members contributed personal resources, and sympathetic Poles made donations. The cost included food, clothing, medical care, and sometimes payments to Polish families who risked their lives daily. Medical care posed special challenges. Jewish children often showed signs of malnutrition, requiring treatment, but taking them to doctors risked exposure. Network member Dr. Helena Szymańska provided discreet care while maintaining their Polish identities. By the end of 1942, Irena's network had successfully created new lives for over 400 Jewish children, transforming them from condemned victims into protected Polish Catholic youngsters with documented identities and loving families. In her small Warsaw apartment, working by candlelight during dangerous curfew hours, Irena Sendler maintained what would become one of the Holocaust's most important documents. With meticulous care, she recorded every detail of the children she had rescued, their real Jewish names, new Polish identities, hiding places, and information about surviving family members. This secret list represented more than record-keeping. It was a sacred trust, a promise to desperate parents who had entrusted their children to strangers. Someday, Irena wrote in her journal, these families will be reunited. These children will reclaim their true names and heritage. This list is their path home. The format evolved as rescued children numbers grew. Initially using simple notebooks, increasing volume and security needs required a sophisticated system. She developed a coding method that disguised information if discovered by German authorities. Each entry contained crucial information. Subject 247, birth name Chaim Goldstein, age 7, parents Mordechai and Rivka, and address, Stocky 14-3, new identity, Stanisław Kowalski, placed with Janina Kowalska, Praga district. Special notes, speaks Yiddish, knows Hebrew prayers, birthmark on left shoulder. Physical security became increasingly challenging as volume grew. Keeping lists in her apartment risked discovery during German raids, but distributing copies increased compromise chances. Irena developed a system storing master lists in multiple locations, with network members maintaining records only for children in their direct care. The most secure storage involved glass jars buried in Jaga Piotrowska's garden. Lists were wrapped in waterproof material and sealed in jars buried beneath an apple tree. This location appeared completely innocent, just another family garden in occupied Warsaw. Network member Jadwiga Piotrowska maintained duplicate records hidden behind loose bricks in apartment walls. Stanisława Busold kept additional copies sewn into winter coat linings. Reasoning documents would be safe during summer storage. The emotional weight was enormous. Each name represented not just a life saved, but a family torn apart. Irena knew many listed parents were already dead, deported to extermination camps. Yet she maintained hope that some families would survive and reunite after the war. The list served as an operational tool. By tracking which ghetto families had been helped, Irena could identify those still needing assistance. She could monitor hidden children's welfare by maintaining contact with Polish families. Security protocols required list information never be discussed openly, even among network members. References used coded language during telephone conversations. The package from Stocky Street was successfully delivered, meant a child from that address had been safely placed. Other network members sometimes questioned maintaining such detailed records. These lists are death sentences if discovered. Władysława Marinowska warned, wouldn't it be safer to rely on memory? Irena firmly rejected this suggestion. Without these records, these children become orphans twice, once from the war and again from history. Their parents trusted us to preserve their identities. We cannot betray that trust. By early 1943, Irena's master list contained information about nearly 500 children rescued from the Warsaw Ghetto, hidden beneath the apple tree. These lists waited like seeds of hope, preserving identities of children whose existence had been declared illegal. By early 1943, the Nazi occupation had tightened its grip on Warsaw, and Irena's rescue network operated under increasingly dangerous conditions. German security forces had become more sophisticated in detecting resistance activities, and the Gestapo had begun systematically investigating anyone with regular access to the ghetto. The liquidation of the Warsaw Ghetto created desperate urgency for rescue operations. Deportation notices arrived daily, and families faced immediate separation. Parents who had hesitated now begged Irena to take their children, knowing the alternative was certain death. "Please, Mrs. Sendler," a mother pleaded during one final visit. "My daughter is only 4. She doesn't understand what's happening. Take her before they come for us tomorrow." The accelerated pace meant taking greater risks. Network members made multiple trips daily, pushing the boundaries of cover stories and official permits. Irena had begun attracting attention from German guards who noticed her frequent presence at ghetto gates. "That social worker comes here too often," she overheard one guard tell another. Perhaps we should investigate what she's really doing. The comment chilled Irena, but she knew she couldn't slow down. Children were dying faster than they could be rescued. The network suffered its first major loss when Stanisława Busold was arrested during a routine document inspection. German police found false identity papers in her possession and subjected her to brutal interrogation. Though she revealed nothing, her arrest forced the network to alter methods and assume they were under investigation. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising in April 1943 brought rescue operations to a temporary halt. Jewish resistance fighters, led by Mordechai Anielewicz, fought desperately against overwhelming German forces. Gunfire and explosions echoed through the city as remaining inhabitants chose to die fighting rather than submit to deportation. Irena watched smoke rise from the burning ghetto, knowing many children she had hoped to save were trapped in the inferno. She told herself, but the guilt was overwhelming. Every name not on her list represented a child who might have been rescued. The uprising's brutal suppression marked the end of systematic rescue operations from the ghetto. Few surviving Jewish inhabitants were deported to extermination camps, and once crowded streets fell silent. Irena's network had to shift focus to protecting children already in hiding. German security measures intensified throughout Warsaw as authorities searched for resistance members and Jewish survivors. Random house searches, identity inspections, and neighborhood sweeps became routine. Network members lived with constant fear that each day might bring arrest and torture. The psychological toll was severe. Jadwiga Piotrowska began having nightmares about children crying. Władysława Marinowska developed nervous habits. The stress of maintaining double lives pushed several network members to the breaking point. Security concerns forced the network to operate in smaller, isolated cells. Members stopped meeting in groups, communicating instead through coded messages and dead drops. Comprehensive planning meetings gave way to hurried information exchanges in public places. By October 1943, Irena knew discovery was likely just a matter of time. The German security net was tightening, and their operations had saved nearly 500 children, a number so large that complete secrecy was becoming impossible. She made final preparations for the lists hidden beneath the apple tree and prepared mentally for inevitable confrontation with the Gestapo. October 20, 1943, began like any other day in occupied Warsaw. Irena prepared for work, reviewed her schedule of visits to families harboring Jewish children, and checked coded messages coordinating her network's activities. She had no way of knowing this ordinary morning would mark the end of her rescue operations and the beginning of a nightmare testing every limit of human endurance. At 8:30 a.m., as Irena sat reviewing case files, the door burst open. 3 men in dark suits filled the doorway, unmistakably Gestapo agents. Their faces were cold and professional as they approached with calculated precision of predators cornering prey. Irena Sendler? The lead agent inquired, though his tone indicated he knew the answer. You will come with us for questioning regarding illegal activities against the German Reich. Irena's blood turned to ice, but she forced herself to maintain composure. Years of dangerous operations had taught her to suppress visible fear. I think there's been some mistake, she replied calmly. I'm a social worker. I help families in need. Oh. We know exactly what kind of help you provide, the agent replied with a cruel smile. Gather your things. You won't be returning to this office. The walk to the Gestapo vehicle felt like a funeral march. Colleagues watched in horrified silence as she was escorted from the building. She caught Jadwiga Piotrowska's eye and saw fear and understanding pass between them. During the drive to Pawiak prison, Warsaw's most notorious detention facility, Irena's mind raced through implications of her capture. How much did Germans know? Had someone been compromised? Most importantly, would she protect the children and people who had risked everything? Pawiak prison was a fortress of suffering. Its gray stone walls containing screams and despair of thousands of Polish resistance members. As Irena was processed and assigned a cell, she saw hollow eyes of other prisoners and understood she had entered a place designed to break human spirits before destroying bodies. Her cell measured roughly 6 feet by 8 feet, containing a thin straw mattress, sanitation bucket, and walls covered with scratched messages from previous occupants. God help my children. Read one message. Tell my mother I died fighting. Read another. These words became Irena's companions during long hours between interrogations. Interrogations began on her second day. Irena was taken to a stark room containing only a table, 2 chairs, and a single bare bulb. The Gestapo officer was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who spoke perfect Polish with slight German accent. Mrs. Sendler, he began conversationally, we know you have been smuggling Jewish children. We know you have been placing them with Polish families. We know you have been creating false documents. What we want are names and locations of these children, and names of everyone who helped you. Irena met his gaze steadily. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a social worker who helps Polish families. I've never engaged in illegal activities. What followed was systematic torture designed to extract information through physical and psychological torment. Irena was beaten until her legs were broken, subjected to electric shocks, near drowning, and other methods pushing her to death's edge without allowing escape into unconsciousness. Through broken ribs, shattered bones, and wounds that refused to heal, Irena maintained her silence. She thought of children sleeping safely, their identities protecting them. She thought of parents who had trusted her. She thought of network members whose lives depended on her continued silence. On January 20, 1944, Irena was awakened by guards earlier than usual and told to prepare for transport. After months of interrogation and torture, she assumed this meant her execution had finally been scheduled. Her broken body could barely support her weight, and she had made peace with dying without seeing the children she had saved grow up in freedom. Today, you face justice for your crimes against the Reich, the guard announced with cruel satisfaction. You will finally pay the price for your interference with German policy. As Irena was loaded into a transport vehicle with other condemned prisoners, she felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that suffering would end. Sorrow that she would never know whether the children would survive the war and reclaim their true identities. The truck moved through familiar Warsaw streets, past buildings where she had conducted rescue operations, past safe houses where Jewish children were still hiding. She tried to memorize these scenes one final time, holding on to hope that someday the city would be free. What Irena didn't know was that Żegota had been working frantically to secure her release. Julian Grobelny and other resistance leaders had contacted a German guard at Pawiak prison, willing to accept substantial bribe in exchange for staging Irena's death and allowing her escape. The plan was audacious and required perfect timing. During transport to the execution site, the bribed guard would create a distraction allowing Irena to slip away. She would be officially listed as executed while actually being hidden by the resistance network. As the transport stopped at a checkpoint, Irena heard gunshots and shouting outside. Guards jumped from the vehicle to investigate what appeared to be an attack by resistance fighters. In the confusion, the bribed guard quickly unlocked Irena's restraints and whispered urgently, "Run. Head toward the church on WWII Street. Someone will be waiting." Despite broken legs and weakened condition, Irena managed to crawl from the vehicle and hide behind nearby buildings. The pain was excruciating, but adrenaline and hope gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. She could hear guards searching for escaped prisoners, their voices growing distant as she moved away. At the designated church, Father Marceli Godlewski waited with civilian clothes and forged identity documents. The priest who had helped hide Jewish children now helped hide their rescuer. "Mrs. Sendler," he said with tears, "God has given you a second chance to complete your work. The escape was only the beginning of new hiding." Irena was officially dead according to German records, meaning she could never return to her previous identity or resume normal life. She became Anna Mazowiecka, a war widow living quietly in a Warsaw suburb, dependent on the same network of safe houses and false identities that had protected the children. Her physical recovery was slow and incomplete. Torture had left permanent damage to her legs, and she would walk with difficulty for the rest of her life. More challenging was psychological adjustment to new existence. She had to remain completely hidden while the war continued, unable to check on rescued children or participate in resistance activities. During months in hiding, Irena learned her rescue network had continued operating despite her arrest. Jadwiga Piotrowska and other surviving members maintained contact with hidden children and continued providing support to Polish families caring for them. The network had adapted to operate without its founder, proving the strength of the system she had created. Living in hiding gave Irena time to reflect on what they had accomplished. Despite torture and imprisonment, despite friends who had died and children they hadn't saved, the rescue operation had succeeded beyond her most optimistic hopes. Nearly 500 Jewish children were alive because of their courage and sacrifice. The winter of 1945 brought both hope and terror to occupied Warsaw. Soviet artillery thundered in the distance as the Red Army approached, promising liberation from Nazi occupation. Yet for Irena, still hiding under her false identity as Anna Mazowiecka, the approaching war's end created new dangers and urgent responsibilities. German authorities, facing inevitable defeat, became increasingly desperate and brutal. Mass executions of prisoners, random killings of civilians, and systematic destruction of Warsaw's infrastructure marked the final months. The children Irena had saved faced new threats as social order collapsed and desperate people turned to informing for money or food. From her hiding place, Irena maintained contact with surviving network members through coded messages and clandestine meetings. Reports were mixed. Some hidden children remained safe with Polish families, while others had been discovered or betrayed as war's chaos increased opportunities for denunciation. 3 children from the Nowak placement have been moved, Jadwiga Piotrowska reported during one dangerous meeting. Someone in the neighborhood was asking questions about their origins. We relocated them just in time. The approaching liberation created new challenges for the rescue network. Many Polish families who had heroically protected Jewish children were now frightened about what would happen when the war ended. Would they be expected to return children they had raised as their own? Would there be legal consequences for their participation? Some children, now older and more aware, began asking difficult questions about their origins. 10-year-old Stanisław Kowalski, formerly David Goldstein, had begun remembering fragments of his earlier life and questioning the stories he had been told about his Polish Catholic parents. He asks why he doesn't look like the rest of the family. His adoptive mother confided to network member Maria Kukulska, "He's starting to remember things from before. What do I tell him?" These conversations forced Irena and her colleagues to begin planning for the post-war period when the truth about children's identities would need to be revealed. They would need to prepare both the children and their adoptive families for reunification attempts, while recognizing that many biological parents had perished in the Holocaust. The Warsaw Uprising of August 1944, though ultimately unsuccessful, demonstrated that liberation was approaching. Irena watched from her hiding place as Polish resistance fighters battled German forces in the streets where she had once conducted rescue operations. The sight filled her with pride and sorrow, pride for her countrymen's courage, sorrow for the massive destruction that the uprising brought to her beloved city. During the uprising's brutal suppression, several safe houses sheltering Jewish children were destroyed or compromised. Network members worked frantically to relocate children whose hiding places were no longer secure, moving them through a city torn apart by street fighting and systematic German retaliation against civilians. We lost contact with the family hiding little Sarah. Władysława Marynowska reported after a particularly dangerous rescue mission. Their building was bombed during the fighting. We found neighbors who saw them escape, but we don't know where they went. These losses were heartbreaking after years of successful protection, but they also demonstrated the resilience of the network that Irena had created. Even without her direct leadership, her colleagues continued adapting to changing circumstances and finding ways to protect the children under their care. As Soviet forces finally approached Warsaw in January 1945, German troops began a systematic retreat that included destroying evidence of their crimes and eliminating potential witnesses. Many prisoners at Pawiak prison were executed during the final weeks of occupation, and Irena realized how fortunate her earlier escape had been. The liberation of Warsaw came not with celebration, but with shock at the scale of destruction. The once vibrant city had been reduced to rubble, with over 85% of buildings destroyed and the population decimated by war, deportations, and systematic murder. Among the ruins, Irena's network began the difficult work of assessing which children had survived and what had happened to their hiding places. The Kowalski family made it through, came one report. The Nowak children are safe, came another, but there were also tragic losses. The house on Marszałkowska Street was bombed. The family and the 2 children they were hiding didn't survive. As Soviet forces established control over the destroyed city, Irena faced a crucial decision. She could remain in hiding under her false identity, or she could risk revealing herself to begin the work of reuniting survivors with any remaining family members. The choice would determine whether the detailed records she had maintained would ever serve their intended purpose. Standing in the ruins of Warsaw as the last German soldiers retreated, Irena understood that her most important work still lay ahead. Saving the children had been only the first step. Now she would need to help them reclaim their lives and identities in a world forever changed by the Holocaust. The liberation of Warsaw in January 1945 found Irena emerging from months of hiding into a city she barely recognized. The vibrant capital of her youth had been reduced to mountains of rubble, with skeletal remains of buildings reaching toward an empty sky. Among these ruins, she began the heart-wrenching work of reuniting the children she had saved with whatever remained of their families and communities. The first challenge was revealing her own survival to a world that believed Irena Sendler had been executed by the Gestapo over a year earlier. Her husband Mieczysław wept when she appeared at their partially destroyed home, unable to believe that the woman he had mourned was standing before him, scarred but alive. "I thought I had lost you forever," he whispered, holding her gently to avoid aggravating the injuries that had never properly healed. "When they told me you were executed, I wanted to die myself. But personal reunions had to wait." Irena's priority was retrieving the glass jars buried beneath Jaga Piotrowska's apple tree, where the master lists of rescued children had been hidden throughout the war. With trembling hands, she unearthed the containers that held the names, locations, and identities of nearly 500 children who might still be alive. The condition of the buried lists was better than she had dared hope. Despite years underground, most of the information remained legible. Each name on those water-stained pages represented not just a life saved, but a family's hope for reunion and a child's path back to their true identity. The reunion process began immediately, but proved far more complex and heartbreaking than anyone had anticipated. Of the 500 children on Irena's lists, most were still alive and safe with their Polish families. But of their biological parents, the statistics were devastating. Fewer than 10% had survived the Holocaust. "Mama, Papa?" 6-year-old Elżbieta Fikowska asked when Irena first approached the Kostreva family who had raised her from infancy. The child, now called Elżbieta Kostrzewiska, had no memory of her Jewish parents or birth name. To her, the Kostrzewas were her true family. This scenario repeated hundreds of times. Children who had spent their formative years with Polish families often had no connection to their Jewish heritage or biological families. They spoke Polish as their native language, practiced Catholic prayers, and identified completely with their adoptive communities. Mrs. Anna Kostrzewska, who had raised Elżbieta for over 4 years, faced an agonizing decision. "She is my daughter in every way that matters," she told Irena through tears. "I love her as much as if I had given birth to her. How can I give her up to strangers, even if they are her blood relatives?" The few successful family reunions brought both joy and trauma. 8-year-old Regina Safirsten was reunited with her father, who had survived Treblinka concentration camp and returned to Warsaw searching for his daughter. The reunion was emotional, but Regina barely remembered the man who claimed to be her father and struggled to connect with Jewish traditions that had been erased from her memory. Many children chose to remain with their Polish families rather than attempt reunion with surviving relatives. The bonds formed during years of shared danger and love proved stronger than biological connections to people they barely remembered. These decisions, while understandable, added another layer of tragedy to the Holocaust's impact on family structures. Irena found herself serving as counselor, mediator, and advocate for children facing impossible choices about their identities and futures. Some wanted to reclaim their Jewish heritage. Others preferred to remain Polish and Catholic, and many struggled with confusion about who they really were after years of necessary deception. The practical challenges were enormous. Many children lacked legal documentation of their true identities, making it difficult to establish their rights to inheritance or family property. The false papers that had saved their lives now complicated their attempts to reclaim their heritage. For nearly 2 decades after the war, Irena Sendler lived in relative obscurity, working as a social worker in communist Poland, while the world remained largely unaware of her extraordinary wartime heroics. The children she had saved grew up, married, had families of their own, and many began searching for information about the woman who had given them life when the world seemed determined to take it away. The first crack in the wall of silence came in the 1960s, when Holocaust survivors and their descendants began speaking more openly about their experiences. Jewish organizations, particularly Yad Vashem in Israel, started systematic efforts to identify and honor non-Jews who had risked their lives to save Jewish people during the Holocaust. In 1965, following testimonials from numerous survivors who had been children on Irena's lists, Yad Vashem recognized her as righteous among the nations, the highest honor Israel bestows on non-Jews who saved Jewish lives during the Holocaust. The recognition ceremony was small and private. Communist Poland was uncomfortable with individual heroes being honored by foreign governments. "I was only doing what any decent person should do," Irena insisted during the ceremony, echoing words she had spoken throughout her life. The real heroes were the children who survived, and the families who risked everything to hide them. But the children she had saved knew better. Elżbieta Fikowska, now grown and with children of her own, traveled from her new home in America to thank the woman who had given her life. "Without you," she told Irena, "I would never have existed. My children, my grandchildren, none of us would be here." As the 1970s and 1980s progressed, more survivors came forward with their stories. Each testimony added another piece to the remarkable puzzle of Irena's rescue network and its unprecedented success in saving lives during humanity's darkest hour. International recognition gradually increased. Documentary filmmakers, journalists, and historians began interviewing Irena and the survivors she had helped. Her story appeared in books about Holocaust rescue efforts and resistance activities, though often as a brief chapter in larger narratives about the war. The most significant recognition came in the 1990s as Poland transitioned to democracy and could finally acknowledge heroes who had been politically inconvenient during the communist era. Irena received numerous Polish honors, including the Order of the White Eagle, Poland's highest civilian decoration. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. In 1999, four teenage students from rural Kansas, Megan Stewart, Sabrina Coons, Elizabeth Cambers, and Janice Underwood, stumbled upon a brief mention of Irena's story while researching a school project about Holocaust heroes. It said she saved 500 kids. Megan later recalled, "We thought it was a typo. How could one person save that many children? We had to find out if it was true." Their research project, initially called Life in a Jar after Irena's method of hiding the children's names, grew into a play that was performed hundreds of times across the United States. The students raised money to bring Irena to Kansas to meet them, creating an international media sensation that finally brought her story to worldwide attention. At age 90, traveling to Kansas was difficult for Irena, but meeting the American teenagers who had discovered her story gave her immense joy. "These young people remind me why we did what we did," she said. "Each generation must learn about courage and choose to act when they see injustice." The Kansas Students Project sparked renewed interest in Irena's story worldwide, and publishers rushed to produce books about her life. Filmmakers created documentaries, and schools began including her story in their curricula about the Holocaust and human rights. In 2003, at age 93, Irena received a letter informing her that she had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Though she didn't win, the nomination brought additional international attention to her story and the broader history of Holocaust rescue efforts. Irena Sendler died on May 12, 2008, at the age of 98, and her funeral in Warsaw was attended by Holocaust survivors from around the world, Polish government officials, and representatives from Jewish organizations who came to honor the woman who had proven that individual courage could triumph over systematic evil. Today, an estimated 20 people are alive because of her courage and the network she created. Each of these lives represents a victory against those who sought to eliminate an entire people. Her legacy challenges each of us to ask, when faced with injustice, will we look away or will we act?